Welcome to the channel, a show about what's going on in technology. We're gonna start the brief with some quiet progress from Tesla. The company has apparently been rolling out a limited Robotaxi pilot program in Austin, Texas, and people are already taking driverless rides in these vehicles. He also had a short stop in London where he met with British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to talk about basically everything from the economy to artificial intelligence to the war in Ukraine. It still writes code, creates designs, helps write text, but according to the company, they've made significant improvements to how Copilot works under the hood. For example, now when you ask Copilot to help you summarize an article, it will actually read the whole thing. It is probably not going to end up being a law until 2027 though. Anyway, it's broken down into the risk levels. So we don't know much about this except for some recent papers that were published. So Waymo has just launched their ride-hailing app in Phoenix, and they're offering fully driverless taxi rides. But they have to be ordered through a separate website, and that's because the app itself is actually incredibly complex. There's stuff like trip planning, traffic prediction, route optimization, handling dynamic events like accidents, managing driver or vehicle availability, pricing and payment processing, user authentication and feedback, and much more. And the kicker here is that none of these parts can fail. Everything has to work perfectly for this to be a viable product. But what's extra tricky is that this process has to be repeated for every single ride. It's not like Uber where the drivers figure all that out for you. And so a lot of startups that try to do this end up failing. They either can't handle scale or they don't have enough money to support the operations. And even legacy companies like GMS Cruise have pulled back from offering a ride-hail service because it was just too hard. So this is a major milestone for Waymo, and it is one of the first glimpses at what a purely driverless transportation system looks like. The first one is about how Chat sometimes forgets things that it previously told you. Even simple things like whether you like pineapple on your pizza or not. And the second paper is about how Chat can memorize facts about you and remember them across conversations. And both of these are problems that pretty much every AI assistant has. They typically use something called a knowledge base to remember things. And most of the time it's not really linked to your identity or your preferences. It's just a collection of random facts. And the hope is that one day they can add a system that recognizes you and adds your own knowledge to the mix. OpenAI tested this using an anim character named Xian, which is a lot like a chatbot. And they found that Xian was able to respond much better to follow-up questions and difficult requests when they could access their own past statements. For example, Xian could keep track of the toppings that were picked for a pizza, even when there were multiple conversations and topics involved. It could also remember who said what and who liked what, even when there were many characters involved. And they're calling this technique Autoped. And while this isn't perfect yet, the hope is to integrate it into Chat one day. So if you like pineapple on your pizza, Chat would remember that. Unacceptable risk, which bans AI like social scoring by governments or biometric systems to manipulate people for MASS surveillance. Then high risk where the AI is used in critical infrastructure, education, law enforcement, or health care. In those cases, companies need to prove that their system is safe and there needs to be human oversight. Then limited risk where AI can be used in things like customer service or white-collar work. Those systems need to be transparent and explainable. And finally low risk, which is basically anything else. And that's where most AI falls into. Now this is still a very broad framework and a lot of details are left open. But the idea that now countries within the EU can adopt these rules and turn them into actual laws. And even though this hasn't gone through yet, you can already tell that America is basically just ignoring it. So thanks, Joe. Previously, it would kind of fake it by pulling a snippet from the text. So now it should be able to do things like make charts from datasets or create a mock-up site based on a description, all things which it wasn't able to do before. And generally, it should be able to understand context better. Remember what you talked about before and just flow more naturally in a conversation. This is pretty typical for AI assistants where the goal is to make them more conversational and less prone to errors or hang-ups. And even though this isn't a big public release, The update is available to users in the Microsoft 365 Copilot waiting list. Fun times. Oh, wait, no. Turns out he didn't actually meet with the Prime Minister because Rishi Sunak forgot he was visiting. Oops. So you know, they added a few features that were previously only available in Chat GPT 4. For example, Gemini can now handle follow-up questions and it can adapt to changes in input during a conversation. This means that if you have a long prompt, it can adjust to changes in tone or style. Or if you suddenly change the subject, Gemini won't be completely thrown off. Plus, Google says that it's improved the speed of Gemini by quite a bit. It's now 3.5 times faster than before, which is nice. And just like with Copilot, this is not a huge public release either. If you have access to Google's services, then you probably already have access to Gemini. So Zuckerberg left empty-handed after asking for the UK government to back his push for stronger regulation of artificial intelligence. But we're starting to hear more about what's going on behind closed doors. The information reports that Apple's headset team has recently shifted focus to making the next generation device lighter and adding ultra-high-resolution displays. Apparently, the current prototype weighs around 150 grams, which is heavy for a headset, and the screens are around 1,000 pixels per eye. That's pretty high, but it's also a lot heavier than other consumer headsets. So this seems to be part of why Apple wants to make the whole headset lighter. And it's not surprising to hear that they're working on better displays. Apple has basically always done this. Think about how big iPhones used to be and how thin they got over the years. That's probably what they're going for here too. And with Apple's event in September fast approaching, this report suggests that the headset team is working overtime to get the product ready for the big day. You know, he doesn't want to be the only one holding all the eggs in the AI basket. And I got to say, I never thought we'd see the day where someone is campaigning for more regulation of a technology. But here we are with Mark Zuckerberg. So far, we have two main pieces of evidence that this is happening. One, there was a sighting of a Tesla vehicle without any exterior or interior cameras. Now, obviously, this could be an early prototype, but it also might mean that they've gotten rid of all the external cameras. And two, some Robotaxi riders posted online about their experience. We don't know how many cars are involved in this Robotaxi program nor how many people have tried it yet, but it does seem to be ongoing. Now, again, Tesla has not said anything about this publicly. So we don't know if this is a small-scale internal test or a sneaky little launch. But either way, we get a glimpse at what driverless rides look like in the real world. So, while you'll always have a safety monitor inside such a car, it's not clear when something like this will be available to the general public. Probably not soon, but we're getting there. Then in other news, Mark Zuckerberg spent last week during Europe, meeting politicians and business leaders from Germany to France to Italy and Switzerland. And speaking of AI, Microsoft quietly released a new version of their Copilot assistant. And it's not really much different on the surface. Then in other AI news, there was a small update to Google's Gemini model. And in other news, Apple has not said anything about Vision Pro since the WWDC event in June. Then lastly for the brief, the European Union Parliament passed sweeping regulations for AI called the AI Act, which is supposed to go into effect in 2024. Okay, that's it for the brief. And for my first story of the week, we're going to be talking about OpenAI quietly working on a memory system for chat. My second story of the week is going to be a little bit shorter, and we're going to be talking about the surprisingly tricky problem of making a ride-hailing app for Robotaxi. And I'm curious what you think. Will we ever live in a world full of rollable phones? Let me know down in the comments. Alright, everyone, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.